So guys, welcome to the channel, this tactical intellectual channel. The topic of concern for today will be dealing with Luzia Woman of South America, Brazil to be exact. Now, for those who don't know, Luzia Woman is not a living person. We're just talking about skeletal remains that were found in Brazil. And Luzia, that's just the nickname that was tacked on. Kind of like how they name hurricanes. You know, a non-living thing gets a name. But the main point is that there was a lot of feelings of acrimony even before this story hit the public. There was a lot of scientists, researchers, and archaeologists who was against Walter Nevis and his team, and they had feelings of deep bitterness, acrimony, and then it became, I guess, fever pitch or on another level when it hit the major news outlets or major media outlets. And this is not coming from just the Caucasian. The Caucasian did not like it, but it's coming from the Red Indian, because the Red Indian adheres to and upholds the Clovis first model, because that perpetuates the notion or idea that their people were the ones who crossed the Bering Strait and peopled the Americas. And then Asians, they learn this stuff too, I guess, when they go to university or college in the States. One of the surprising groups of people who was silent when all this stuff came about, but they adhere to the Clovis first model also, these African immigrants. Like I say, if you're FBA, you better take this stuff serious, man, because this is dealing with part of your lineage. We have that three-way amalgamation, and we know Pan-Africans and white people and all these other groups, they just want to tack you on to Africa. They want to take 1/3 of your lineage and paint it as being 100% Africa. Africa's 1/3. But let me not ramble. This is what I want to say. It's imperative that we understand this matter and we know of the historical record when it comes to this narrative surrounding Luzia Woman. Think of it as a fork in the road. You see, the Clovis first model is the one that's on the left-hand side. That's the one that a lot of people, majority of people in this world, hold true to. And the one that's on the right-hand side is the new information, you know, the one that Walter Nevis and his team worked on, and the one that Richard Nevis, he's the one who did the reconstruction of her skull, by the way. But that's the one that we have to protect and hold fast to and defend, really. So let's veer over to the historical record and talk about that a little bit. I want to sum it up because I don't want to be too long-winded on this, but you have to understand that there's a Clovis first model that researchers and archaeologists have stood on for generations. Now, what's the Clovis first model? Well, it's surrounding and it upholds the red native narrative. It talks about how the red natives, they crossed the Bering Strait and they peopled Canada, North America, you know, what we know of as the United States, Central America, South America, and the islands of the West Indies or the Caribbean. Now, Walter Nevis and his team and other people, they found skeletal remains in South America, Brazil to be exact. And these remains were of people who predated the Clovis people by a millennia. And what type of people were those that predated Clovis first? Well, these people were an Australo-Melanesian type of people. And then there's a reconstruction done by Richard Nevis, you know, of the United Kingdom. So he reconstructed the skull of Luzia Woman, and they showed research that Luzia was a melanated or a Negro woman, not a Red Indian. So that's where that acrimony and really the power to alter history is at play. That's that preemptive strike that we have to be mindful of, and we have to come up with more information that kind of boxes that new narrative, that left-hand narrative, back into the ground. We gotta have that new narrative 6 feet beneath our Nikes, you know. So let me go ahead and introduce this video right here, and the link to this brother's video will be in the description. So here's the reaction portion of this video presentation. I don't want to do too much talking, but if there's some important points, key moments that you guys need to take note of and store into your memory banks, I'll definitely state it beforehand or afterwards. But let's go ahead and get into the video here.
So in 1999, BBC did a special about Luzia. This is Luzia, the oldest remains found at the time in the Americas. And as you can see, this is very much what you would consider a Negro.
All right. Take note of that. Store it into your memory banks.
And this hurt a lot of people's feelings. I mean, this made a lot of people mad. And it wasn't so much a big deal until people really started talking about it almost 20 years later.
Okay. Store that into your memory banks also. It was almost, 2 decades before they really start dwelling on it. And lo and behold, they actually did a preemptive attack on it because they don't want that as history right there. And it's not just one group, but it's multiple groups of people that's not FBA. This benefits FBA and it hinders other people. But let's go ahead.
To the extent they burned down the museum. Let me show you why they're so mad. Listen to this.
Walter Nevis is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil.
Hey, Walter Nevis, Sao Paulo University in Brazil. There's some irony about, I guess, the institution that came out with the new information. You know, it's very cannibalistic, but let's go ahead and proceed.
He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luzia to be a Mongoloid, but then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we started running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing these people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people as anything except Mongoloid.
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia. This is very clear in South America. All populations I have in my data set from the whole South America, okay, from 7,000 to the present, they are absolutely classic Mongoloid. And everything I have with more than 9,000, okay, is absolutely non-Mongoloid.
So, of course, we all know who really didn't like to hear that, right? So when articles like this came out, you know, they were really, really disturbed. Now, your kids can get on the internet and read about Luzia, who they said was a Negroid, right? And like I said, this had people upset because that means, guess what? Negroes were the first people on the American continent, which is a fact. I mean, Luzia is far from the only evidence to prove that. But this is just one of those big ones that really, 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 really disturbed them.
It's called acrimony. They're feeling very acrimonious because it messes with their pride, their ego, and other things when it comes to, I guess, claims that can be made or land that was probably taken. You can actually prove that if you can, I guess, prove your genetic inheritance to the land known as the United States of America.
So, what did they do?
And we're back with a new video as a massive fire ripped through the National Museum of Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. The museum recently celebrated its 200th anniversary and had 20 million historical artifacts in its collection, including a collection from ancient Egypt. And there's word now that most of the items have been destroyed. Brazil's president calls it a tragedy. The fire broke out after the museum had closed for the day. The two fire hydrants closest to the museum weren't working.
Oh, man.
Cause of that fire is unknown.
All right, so that's very convenient that the two closest fire hydrants weren't working. And that's not all, but they couldn't even get into the museum also. I think they said the door was locked. So just add on top of it. First of all, the fire is already a problem right there. But then the fire hydrants aren't working. But then let's compound that with the doors not even. You can't even gain entrance into the museum. Come on, man. This is sabotage 101 here.
So the fire happened in September of 2018, September 2nd to be exact. And then at the end of October, almost 2 months later, out of the blue, some random firefighter all of a sudden discovered Luzia's fossil and was recovered, right?
BS. Straight merda or mierda.
Now, first of all, that already don't make sense. Look at this building. You see it's burnt out, but they recovered Luzia. And then a month after that, what did they do? They decided all of a sudden to drop a new report and say that a study by 72 different people in all these different countries decided that Luzia didn't have African features and they were actually just Amerindian.
All right, hey, let me go back to the picture of the building right here. This is from the article here, but here's a more clear picture of the building. I want to say second level, and as you can see, everything that was inside of that building was burned to a crisp. So let's go ahead and check out the article here.
So somehow, after the fire, they recovered Luzia's skeleton and they did a new study, and now it's all of a sudden they are totally different people, and they tried to redo the face and make a new face. Now this is 2 months after a fire that burnt down an entire museum. I dare say that they burnt the museum down because of this artifact, because it started getting popular. And then, this is the funniest part. First of all, they never did a DNA test on it in the first place because it was too old for that in the way it was found. And secondly, all of a sudden now, they got a DNA test 2 months after the museum burnt down and this artifact actually burnt. So now they just pop up with I'm just going to say, some random skull. And it's nowhere in the world you're going to say that this was that original Luzia skull. All of a sudden, you got a new skull and you ran DNA on it. And now, no, it ain't what we thought. She ain't Negroid. She's Amerindian.
And you know what? Wikipedia is very egregious in pushing this new narrative also because, like I say, you know they couldn't wait to quote unquote debunk or come up with a new narrative surrounding Luzia or Luthia because that turned or that kicked up too much dust. They were too comfortable, and then when the facts came out that hey, these people predated the Clovis first, the model, the Red Indian that is, they just felt, I guess, inferior, or what they call it, they had an inferiority complex because they know what this stuff means here, and they had to do a preemptive strike against that whole notion that, hey, Australo-Melanesian type of Negro people, melanated people, they were over here millennia before this Clovis people or the Red Indians were here. So let's go ahead and move forward.
Man, these people are devious and treacherous. And so now you see these online internet trolls trying to use this fake study to say, she was never a Negro. But it's nonsense, and we're going to keep proving why it's nonsense. Check this out. Now, this is an article that was published in the New York Times 2 days after the fire, September 4th, 2018. Let's scroll on down. It's a particular paragraph I like to read for y'all, so y'all can see what I mean when I say this. They just made up some nonsense out of the blue. Talking about they DNA tested and all of that. They did no such thing. Now check this out. Dr. Reich is a specialist in ancient human DNA, using such material to study our species' migrations around the planet. They're still stuck on this out of Africa thing. He was unaware of any retrieval of DNA from the Luzia fossil, meaning they have never pulled any DNA from this fossil. But while no sufficiently preserved DNA has so far been reported from bones older than 1,000 years in South America, technology for the study of ancient DNA is advancing by leaps and bounds, and a specimen like Luzia might have concealed genetic secrets. So, 2 days after the fire, they're saying they have never even tested any fossils older than 1,000 years in South America, right? But 2 months later, all of a sudden, they've done a DNA test on a burnt up fossil. Really? I mean, do y'all really believe that? The answer is no. That's complete nonsense. They did not do a DNA test on this fossil, or on Luzia. They did not. And they just can't stand the fact that the scientists said that she was Negroid. And they based that off the shape of her skulls, and they could make the difference between her and the Mongoloids, right?
This is very clear in South America. All populations I have in my data set from the whole South America, okay, from 7,000 to the present, they are absolutely classic Mongoloid. And everything I have with more than 9,000, okay, is absolutely non-Mongoloid.
So even if they had done a DNA test, they would still have to try to explain why there's a difference in the skulls between the Mongoloids and Luzia and all the people before her, all right? And they can't do it. So now let's look at this part too, all right? They were actively trying to rescue items out of the museum while it was burning. Look here, number one. They show you number one. Luzia's on the second floor upstairs. She is not one of the people that was getting rescued out of that building.
All right. Let me show a clearer picture while he's speaking so you have a better idea of what he's speaking on. And these are the floors right here. Okay? Here's a diagram that's more clear.
All right? There is no way in the world that they actually rescued this fossil. They did not. It's just a complete story. And this mysterious firefighter randomly found it all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's very suspect, man. Some firefighter just found the exact skull, despite it being burnt to a crisp and highly, highly damaged.
Nonsense, man. These people are liars. The fact is, they just can't handle the truth.
They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia.
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
So the bottom line is they never did a DNA test on Luzia, not before or after the fire. I don't know what they claiming they did, but it's fraud. Okay, BBC did a whole video, a whole special about Luzia, and they let you know she was Negroid. And if you were going to debunk it, as they say, then you needed to make a video to prove that, especially if it's 20 years later. The video's so much better than it was 20 years earlier, right? So nah, it's a fraud, it's a lie, and they can't tell the truth. And we're going to keep giving them the truth anyway.
So now I want to segue over to the BBC article, and this article gives insight into why I think the whole National Museum fire was eyebrow raising, because it was so suspect in my opinion. Look at what they say. The article says we had to break down doors. So Professor Paolo Buckup, an expert in fish science at the museum, arrived at 7:30 local time to find parts of the building where animal specimens were kept still intact. Okay, cool. It's unfortunate, but the firefighters were not in a position to do anything. What? To fight anything, he told BBC Brazil's Julia Carneiro. They had no water, no ladders, no equipment. Okay. All right, so you see this picture, and beneath it, it says, employees are distraught at the loss of so many artifacts. That's crazy to me. All right, guys, so let me speak on something a little bit. My thoughts on the fire that happened at the National Museum down in Brazil. It has me thinking that all of this stuff that has happened after the fire, that's really a power play to reestablish some historical fantasy-driven notion of ancestral homelands. You got to understand, Walter Nevis and his team, they presented to the world something that acted as a great disruptor. And I say that because a lot of questions have to be answered when it comes to ancestral homelands, when you see the fact that, okay, the people who were first in the Americas were Negroes, melanated people. That's going to throw something else off, because people are going to ask, okay, if this happened and they were the first, what else? So you have to really spend time reestablishing that fantasy-driven narrative that, okay, for example, when it comes to ancestral homelands or origin points, a lot of people around the world think something that goes like this. Okay, the geographic area that we know of as the Middle East, people think that that's the Arab, you know, the little mixed looking Arab. They think that that's his origin point. That's where it all started for him. And when it comes to Asian people around the world, okay, they point to East Asia. Okay, that's the little box that East Asians fit in right there. And they were the only ones there, nobody else, okay? All right. And then when it comes to melanated people around the world, okay, so Africa, they want to point to Africa as the origin point or ancestral homelands of melanated people. And it's no different than Europe when it comes to Caucasian or white people. Europe, that's where they started, and nobody else came from there, okay? Don't say that. And then it's no different when it comes to the Americas. They want to say the red Indian, the person that we know of as, you know, that image that pops into our head when it comes to the American Indian. You know, they want to say that this is their ancestral homeland, nobody else. And the work that Walter Nevis and his team presented to the world has shook up their notion. So, hey, folks have to scramble and do something. And to me, it looks so convenient that a fire happened and nobody could get inside and fight the fire. The doors were locked and they had to spend time breaking the doors, and they had no water. The 2 fire hydrants was in op. They had no equipment. So that wasted time. But then a miracle happened. A firefighter found Luzia's skull and they redid everything. And it takes us to this story right here. Okay, let's check out this trash article right here. It says, the new face of Luzia and the Lagoa Santa people. Beneath, it says, study by 72 researchers from 8 countries concludes that the Lagoa Santa people are descendants of Clovis culture migrants from North America. Distinctly African features attributed to Luzia were wrong. Yay! That's how they do. And let's check out this stupid reconstruction here. This don't even look like a woman. It look like a dude. All right, so yeah, they had to put the same thing twice, man. It says, yo, these people are shameless, man. But let's check out what they say. I'm gonna skim. Oh yeah, and I forgot, the article's by Peter Moon. Okay, so it's all right. The history of peopling of the Americas has just been interpreted afresh. So this is the largest and most comprehensive study ever conducted on the basis of fossil DNA extracted from ancient human remains found on the continent, has confirmed the existence of a single ancestral population for all Amerindian ethnic groups, past and present. Come on, man. We read through this BS right here. It reeks of subterfuge, man. The fix was in with that fire. So they say over 17,000 years ago, this original contingent crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia to Alaska. Okay, so at least they admit that the red Indian is really Siberian in nature and began peopling the New World. That's what they want you to believe, man. So fossil DNA shows an affinity between this migratory current and the populations of Siberia and northern China. Contrary to the traditional theory, it had no link to Africa or Australasia. So I mean, this right here, they're kind of throwing some things off balance, man. This is like misinformation right here, you know, to try to undermine Walter Nevis's work All right, so let's go ahead and see what other bullish they say. It says the new study also reveals that once they had settled in North America, the descendants of this ancestral migratory flow diversified into two lineages some 16,000 years ago. The members of one lineage crossed the Isthmus of Panama and peopled South America in three distinct consecutive waves. I had enough of this, man. Let's go ahead and go into the next article, the next page here. And of course, this is saying here, okay, according to the researchers' findings, the lineage that made the north-south journey between 16,000 and 15,000 years ago belonged to the Clovis culture, named for a group of archaeological sites excavated in the western United States and dating from 13,500 to 11,000 years ago. All right, so let me give a little background. I'm gonna skim through this. If you don't know what Clovis was or is, it says that the Clovis culture was so named when flint spearheads were found in the 1930s at the dig in Clovis, New Mexico. Okay, so it says Clovis sites have been identified throughout the United States, Mexico, and Central America. Okay, so in North America, the Clovis people hunted Pleistocene megafauna such as giant, sloth and mammoth. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and let me scroll down a little bit. Is there anything that I need to? Okay, let me go ahead and read this. Among the many known Clovis sites, the only burial site associated with Clovis tools is in Montana, where the remains of a baby boy were found and dated to 12,600 years ago. So DNA extracted from these bones has links to DNA from skeletons of people who lived between 10,000 and 9,000 years ago in caves near Lagoa Santa, Minas Gerais state, Brazil. In other words, the Lagoa Santa people were partial descendants of Clovis migrants from North America. So this is what they say. From the genetic standpoint, the Lagoa Santa people are descendants of the first Amerindians, said Andre Strauss, who coordinated the Brazilian part of the study. So look at this right here. Strauss is affiliated with the University of São Paulo's Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. So to me, this is kind of like administrative and intellectual cannibalism, because Walter Nevis, he was indeed affiliated and he was a teacher at the University of São Paulo, and he had this famous research that he presented to the world. And now these new current administrators, they want to undermine his study. You know, his study was too thorough, and to me, I think this entire article is sloppily done. It looks very desperate. And I say that because look at what they say here. Let's go to the next page. It says, not all the human remains found at some of the most ancient archaeological sites in Central and South America belonged to genetic descendants of the Clovis culture. The inhabitants of several sites did not have Clovis-associated DNA. This shows that besides its genetic contribution, the second migration wave to South America, which was Clovis-associated, may also have brought with it technological principles that would be expressed in the famous fishtail points that are found in many parts of South America, Strauss said. How many human migrations from Asia came to the Americas at the end of the Ice Age more than 16,000 years ago was hit thereto unknown. The traditional theory formulated in the 1980s by Nevis and other researchers was that the first wave had African traits or traits similar to those of the Australian Aboriginals. The well-known forensic facial reconstruction of Luzia was performed in accordance with this theory. Luzia is the name given to the fossil skull of a woman who lived in the Lagoa Santa region 12,500 years ago, and is sometimes referred to as the first Brazilian. Look at how they have that in quotes. I can feel the negativity and the vitriol from here. The bust of Luzia with African features was built on the basis of the skull's morphology by British anatomical artist Richard Nevis in the 1990s. Now, you know what? It's not African features, but it's original person, original people features right there. Okay. And let's continue. It says, however, skull shape isn't a reliable marker of ancestrality or geographic origin. Genetics is the best basis for this type of inference, Strauss explained. And I bet they sound like that too. The genetic results of the new study show categorically that there was no significant connection between the Lagoa Santa people and groups from Africa or Australia. So the hypothesis that Luzia's people derived from a migratory wave prior to the ancestors of today's Amerindians have been disproved. On the contrary, the DNA shows that Luzia's people were entirely Amerindian. I can see them just sounding like ruckus, man. All right, so let's look at this part right here. A new bust has replaced Luzia in the Brazilian scientific pantheon. Caroline Wilkinson, a forensic anthropologist at Liverpool, John, who gives a ish. All right, that's so bitter, man. So bitter. Well, dang, I guess they got us then, man, right? Not so fast. Let's get to the nitty gritty and roll out this Ancient Pages article, and it's in regards to Apiuna Man. Check out the title here. It says, controversial 3D reconstruction of 10,000-year-old Apiuna Man reveals first Americans came from Africa. Let's clear up that last part about first Americans coming from Africa. It was not a direct trek from Africa, but the story goes that, hey, Africa to the Near East to Asia, Asia to, I guess, India to Europe, and well, there was a part that broke off from like the Near East to Europe, and there was also direct migration in Africa to Europe. And then, okay, so where am I at now? I'm at Asia, okay, Russia, then a band stayed there, and a band went to India, and then another band went to Southeast Asia, then another band went to Australia and those islands, Sunderland, and then another band stayed in Sunderland, and another band migrated from Sunderland to the Americas. Okay, I hope that clears it up. So if I find some other information, I'll definitely post it, but all of my information is meant to support the idea that the world was melanated at one point. Okay, no ancestral origins or homelands that is fantasy narrative driven. None of that here. So let's see what it says here. It says Apiuna Man resembled Luzia, who had Negroid features. So let's go to the next part. And it says, okay, what was puzzling about Luzia is that her features appeared to be Negroid rather than Mongoloid. This suggests that the Western Hemisphere may have initially been settled not only earlier than thought, but by people distinct from the ancestors of today's North and South American Indians. Okay, we can no longer say that the first colonizers of the Americas came from the north of Asia, as previous models have proposed, said Dr. Walter Nevis, an anthropologist at the University of Sao Paulo, who made the initial discovery along with an Argentine colleague, Hector Pucciarelli. The skeleton is nearly 2,000 years older than any skeleton ever found in the Americas, and it does not look like those of Amerindians or North Asians. All right, so 3D reconstruction of Apiuna's ancient skull. Brazilian graphic designer Cicero Moraes have used sophisticated computer software to reconstruct the face of Apiuna, and the high-end results suggest that Apiuna was part of the first wave of people in America who were Africans with Austro-Melanesian characteristics. The theory that the first Americans were originally from Africa is controversial because it goes against the mainstream belief that the American continent's first pioneers were Asian. And that's the crux of the matter right there. All right, so let me talk for a minute. I do think that there's an agreement between different groups, the Caucasian, the African, the Asian, the Arab, and the so-called Middle East, and certainly the Red Amerindian. I do think they're all in agreement to keep the narrative, the fantasy narrative, that, okay, these groups right here, they had a distinct origin point in these specific areas, free from all other people. No migrations happened. This is just where they popped up at. Okay. And I really want to single out Africa, because if you know anything about Gorée Island in Senegal, you know that all this stuff is made up, fantasy driven, and it's not really based in truth as they purport. And talking about Australo-Melanesian people being the first inhabitants of the Americas, that's a true fact. But that's going to throw a lot of stuff off, man, because it's like, what else you guys are lying about? No, what else fantasy are you feeding us in these universities and school and etc.? You know, why you dumbing us down? Okay, you talking about a world, you don't want to uncover the fact that the world was melanated at one point throughout history, man. You know, you don't want to tell the true historical facts. You rather dispense false historical narratives. Okay, so let's go back to the article. Where was I at? Okay, some scientists state that the skull of Apiuna and Luzia appeared to confirm a decades-old argument that Africans, they're talking about melanated people, were the first colonizers of the Americas. So how and when did melanated people reach America? Archaeologists believes that there were at least two large migratory waves of distinctly different people who made the odyssey across the Bering Straits, the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, reaching the American continent thousands of years before the first Europeans arrived. Apiuna may have been the first nomadic wave, with Luzia or Luthia. Alright, so the next page reads, more evidence is needed. Walter Nevis, a professor of human evolutionary research at Sao Paulo University, was the anthropologist who revealed the surprising discovery of the cave woman's Luzia's race. Says we should not jump into conclusions. We need more evidence than a facial reconstruction. We have to be very careful in terms of making big hypotheses about the occupation of the Americas based solely on facial reconstruction. Okay, so now right here is just showing the stages of facial reconstruction. Okay, because facial reconstruction of prehistoric bones is done after lengthy scientific analysis, then artistic creativity follows. Even so, the anthropologist added research strongly suggests the first wave of inhabitants to the New World was Luzia's people, who began arriving as early as 15,000 years ago. These people were, it says Africans, but they're melanated people, okay? We don't know, okay? With Australo-Melanesian characteristics. They came from Southeast Asia, migrating from there in two directions. Some went south to Australia, where today's Aboriginal people appear to be their descendants. Okay, so when they say Africa, I mean, come on. They were far removed from Africa. It's like being on the first bus stop and you getting off, I guess, the fifth stop. Somebody that got off on the fourth stop, they didn't have anything to do with the first stop, if you know what I mean. Okay, even though the bus is coming from there, you know, the people that's getting on or off, they're coming from different points, man. And so I know the correct terms to express what that really is. Divergence time and ethnogenesis. That's what it is right there. Ethnogenesis, the beginning of your origin right there. So, or your ethnic group. You know, these people, they weren't African. They were so far removed from Africa. They were far removed from Australia. Those Australians, they were far removed from Asia. Those Asians were far removed from the Middle East. Not the Middle East, but the Near East. The people of the Near East, you know, they were kind of similar due to close proximity with Africa, of course. But then that band that left, I guess, left Africa to Europe, they were far removed from everybody else, until they came back around, I guess, several millennia later and came in contact with these people. But that's for another presentation right there. I'll tie it in nicely soon. But that's part of the makeup of the modern day FBA person. That three-way amalgamation of different original melanated peoples. You got the Africans that came from pre-colonial Africa. You have the native population, the originals, and then you have those Europeans, the original melanated Europeans. So that's our composition there. The blood that flows in our veins is composed of 3 different types of people, original peoples. Before I close out, I want to skim over this Daily Mail article here, and it says, "Were Africans the first Americans? 3D reconstruction of 10,000-year-old caveman's face controversially challenges long-held theories about the first settlers." And below it says, "Man's skull was discovered inside a cave during an archaeological dig in southeast Brazil 50 years ago. Digital imaging by a Brazilian graphic designer shows the features of a 40 to 50-year-old prehistoric man. Apiuna bears a close likeness to Luzia, the name given to the 11,500-year-old skull of a young," it says African, but it's just a melanated woman. Discovery reignites a decades-old argument that melanated people were the first colonizers and not Asians. And this article was done by Janet Tappan Coelho in Brazil and Phoebe Wetson for Mail Online. And of course, it was published all the way back June 5th, 2017. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to the next part. And what does it say? Okay. I'm going to start at the second sentence or paragraph there. Line, rather. It says, "Digital imaging by Brazilian graphic designer Cicero Moraes, who is not of African descent himself, shows the features of a 40 to 50-year-old prehistoric," they say African, but just melanated man, "whose face resembles Australian Aborigines." See, so there's that little indecision that they be throwing at us to confuse us. I guess they say African man, then Australian Aboriginal. Okay, come on, get it together, man. It says the reconstruction, nicknamed Apiuna, was based on a skull discovered deep inside a cave during an archaeological dig in Lagoa Santa, southeast Brazil, some 50 years ago. The discovery of the African's face controversially challenges the belief that the American continent's first pioneers were Asian. So I don't really like that whole stripping them of agency, their own autonomy. They always have to put Africa at the forefront. Like I say, they are so far removed from Africa. They're the first people there. Do not put that African. Don't other these people. That's the problem right there. Don't other the first people. And then you give respect to the latecomers. I don't like that. That's the whole issue right there. Nothing wrong with being African or Africans themselves, but just that whole campaign of othering the first people. Problematic, very problematic. So it says, instead, it suggests that Apiuna was part of the first wave of people in America who were Africans with Austro-Melanesian characteristics. That's a riddle wrapped in an enigma right there. Now, what we have here on the next page is the digital imaging that was done by Cicero Moraes. And, of course, we know people who look like this in the United States, especially the Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, Texas, Louisiana, the Midwest. So let's go ahead and go to the next part. All right, so they have the discovery in brief. I'll skip this part. I am linking it to the description, but you can pause it if you want to read it yourself. But let's go ahead and move on to the next. Okay. So this says that the news comes just weeks after Mr. Moraes also revealed the 3D facial characteristics of a 28-year-old Siberian Asian male modeled from another prehistoric cranium. The skull, found in the same archaeologically rich region, has similar traits to today's American Indians. Apiuna also bears a close likeness to Luzia or Luzia, the name given to the 11,500-year-old skull of a young melanated woman whose remains are the oldest ever found on the South American continent. So, in 1998, Luzia's fossilized bones excavated more than 20 years before from the same region as the primitive men were found to have similar ethnic characteristics to modern-day indigenous sub-Saharan Africans, native Australians, and Melanesians. Walter Nevis, a professor of human evolutionary research at Sao Paulo University, was the anthropologist who revealed the surprising discovery of the cave woman's race. At the time, this revelation sent shockwaves through the scientific community because Luzia looked nothing like the Siberian Asians who scientists agree are the genetic forebears of today's Native Americans. So we're going to move on to the next part, and on this page is nothing but a bunch of images. On the top you have the 3D facial reconstruction of Apiuna Man, and it's showing off his features there. So you can see how he looks bald. You can see the x-ray photo where it's just the skull, and then you can see the entire, I guess, full picture of him. You know, his skin, his features, his hair. You know, it looked like he had a little Jerry curl going that he cut off a little bit. But we went over that like 7 minutes ago. So what I went over probably 15 minutes ago in the other article, the two skulls, that's what they look like there. So these are reconstructed by Cicero Moraes. All right. So you can see the difference there. The Diarum, and he's on the left, and then Apiuna Man, he's on the right. So Negro skull, then the Asian guy right there. So let's go ahead and move on to the next page. So on the next page we have Erica Susanna Baniai. So she's just going back to the location where her father found the Asian or the Asiatic skull of Diarum back in 1971. But let's look at the article here below. It says, even so, the anthropologist added research strongly suggests the first wave of inhabitants to the New World was Luzia's people, who began arriving as early as 15,000 years ago. These people were African with Austro-Melanesian characteristics. They came from Southeast Asia, migrating from there in two directions. Some went south to Australia, where today's Aboriginal people appear to be their descendants, and others went north, navigating along the coast and across the Bering Strait until they reached the Americas, Dr. Nevis explained. Not everyone made the journey at the same time. Many remained in Siberia, and this population evolved into North Asians during the harsh climatic conditions. This group entered the Americas a couple of thousand years after Luzia's people, said Dr. Nevis. Now, let me speak on that for a minute. I did something in my, I guess, origins of Asians, East Asians to be exact, video where I guess the Yamnayan people, they kind of broke off and they probably kind of mixed in, but then there were other groups that developed, you know, the East Asians that we know of today, they developed in Asia, and apparently the original melanated population of Asia and even Kamchatka, Russia, they start dying off, and there's probably proof that some genocide happened. You know, the East Asians kind of genocided, and then even some, they probably, I guess, mixed in and created some hybrid type of populations. But you know, there was a genocide that happened. like on this video, I don't want to get too deep into the genetics, but Japanese, and I want to say Koreans, and probably the South Chinese, they all have the genetics of the original people, and it's kind of similar to what the Andaman Island, the people of Sentinel Island, have genetic wise. But like I say, this is not the proper video for it, because I'm making a case for Luzia and the original people of the Americas. Now, probably in future videos, I'll probably tie all this stuff together, because you guys need to know that this is coming from a place of truth and nonfiction, as opposed to being fanciful about history and rewriting history in the wrong direction based on falsehoods. But all these things that I'm speaking of, it can be backed up in multiple different ways: genetic, historical accounts, whatever, what have you. Anything you can think of, I can back it up that way. Now let's go ahead and move to the next page. And okay, I have it up. So these people, they have an image of two skulls they're holding in their hands. So Walter Nevis, that's something you have to look at. You have to look at him and his research that he's done, because of course that video that you've already seen, the National Museum fire, they're trying to undo his work, and they're definitely undermining it. And it's people from the same university that Walter Nevis worked at who are doing the undermining. That is crazy right there. So let's go ahead and look at it, and then we'll close it out. It says, and he revealed, while many experts believe the original Stone Age African Americans died out, DNA evidence points to Luzia's community surviving until very recently. So analysis of the remains of the Botocudo Indians, a hunter-gatherer tribe that once lived in southeast Brazil, shows their bones had a similar genetic history to Luzia's African Austro-Melanesian heritage. The Botocudos died out at the end of the 19th century after living in an isolated existence away from groups that gave rise to the modern native South American people. Dr. Nevis continued, today I believe in three different scenarios: that in some places of the Americas, Siberian Asians totally replaced the Austro-Melanesians, while in other places the Austro-Melanesians managed to survive until very recently, and lastly, in different parts of the continent, the two races interbred. This is a very complex issue. Proof of who came first and why one race was more dominant than the other will be researched and debated for many years to come, said Dr. Nevis. So I'm going to close that out, but I really want to focus back on what he said. All right. And this is a worldwide thing here. You can actually logically extrapolate what happened here, and you can span it across Asia. You can definitely span it across Europe, span it across India. You can span it across, let's just come back to the Americas, and that's what we're doing here. So what he said that really makes sense is, okay, this is a very complex issue, so you have to be willing to, I guess, bathe yourself into the gray area and swim on that side, as opposed to that simple narrative driven explanation that the world, everybody around the world are presented with. Okay, and that goes back to what I say, man, the origin point, the single origin point, and it was just this one group here that came from this spot and nobody else. Okay, everybody has their own designated, that's the narrative right here. Okay, if you're melanated people, then Africa, that's your, you came here via slavery. And like I say, Pan-Africans, they co-sign that trash, and there's a lot of post-Berlin Conference Africans who co-sign that too. And listen, man, Africans didn't even know about the slave trade back in the day, so now they know about it. They're experts on it all of a sudden. You know, I don't really take that serious, man, because that colonized mind that a lot of these post-Berlin Conference Africans have and are equipped with, it's too simple. So, you know, a lot of debates I hear Africans be like, yo, you scared to be African. You don't want to be African. You know, that fear of being, gotta kill that, man. We have to tell the truth. And they have to really go back to the lab, the drawing board, and just get their knowledge up, get their intellectual weight up. So you have to remember these scenarios here. You have to know that there are areas that were once highly populated by the originals, that a total population replacement happened. I mean, that could have happened quickly or over some time. And then in other places, they were here until recently, but then there are other parts where, or scenarios where, the red native and the original native interbred, intermixed, created some hybrids, and you see them today. And again, let's be logical for a minute. There are pictures of Koreans, who melanated, dark-skinned, Negro, original, whatever you want to call them, melanated Koreans, melanated Japanese, Vietnamese, so on and so forth. And this is during the time of the camera, the photography, machinery and technology was around. So this is very recent stuff here. And then, of course, you know, there's some genocides that happen in Asia. And there are pictures of people in Kamchatka, Russia, too. Melanated, Negro-looking people. They kind of look like Australian Aboriginals up there. But again, some of those people been bred out. There are people in the region of Georgia, this, not the state, but the country of Georgia over there. There are some melanated Negro people in that area. So again, we're seeing this in real time in Australia. You know, a lot of these Aboriginals, I've heard them say it. They commented on YouTube also, and in other places. I guess newspaper comment sections. They said that, hey, Australians, white Australians, are trying to breed them out of existence. So that's something that we need to be mindful of. That's a tactic that has happened forever, all the way back in those days, before the 1900s. Like, what is it? Tahiti went through the same thing. You know, people been bred out, killed, probably shipped out to the Hawaiians, the Polynesians, same thing. So that's about it with that. I'll come up with more examples of the original melanated, swarthy, brune aboriginals of the Americas, and I'll just show my proof also, show my work, so to speak. So that's about it with this. I'll catch you guys later. Thanks for checking out this video presentation. Take care.